Hello and welcome to the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Refugees, asylum seekers, exiles. The return to Syria begins with people who've given up basically on returning home, now getting back to their own soil. Syria, after Assad, is starting to take shape this Tuesday, December the 10th, with the country, a people still trying to come to terms with the end of the Assad regime that had ruled for over 50 years. Europe starts, though, to close its doors. States that had welcomed Syrian refugees are now stopping processing asylum requests. But does the end of the Assad regime mean that it's safe to go back? The world watches then, other states calculating their stance as the future of Syria starts to take shape. Our panel to discuss these many issues raised, and they are being raised by the day, aren't they? In Jeddah, Ammar Abdrabbo is waiting to join us, a freelance photojournalist. Thank you for being with us, Ammar. In Washington, Anna Borshevskaya, fellow at the Washington Institute for Near Eastern Policy and author of Putin's War in Syria, Russian Foreign Policy and the Price of America's Absence. Thanks for joining us. Here in the studio, Patricia Lalonde, Vice President of Geopolitical, former member of the European Parliament and researcher at IPSA here in Paris, and Thomas Jani, Medias Director of Solidarité Internationale. Before we let loose our panel, let's get a setting of the scene, especially of the transition that's happening now. Eliza Herbert with this.
The man on the right is Syria's new caretaker prime minister, Mohammed al-Bashir. He is the former head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's de facto government in Idlib, the Syrian Salvation Government that served the northwestern enclave of 2 million people. Now he will be tasked with leading the entire country's transitional government until the 1st of March 2025. And rebuilding and uniting a country that has been gripped by civil war for more than a decade. While many Syrians hold hope for the future of their country, some world leaders have expressed concern that Bashar al-Assad's fall could lead to further instability. HTS, led by Ahmed al-Sharaa, better known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani, was once an offshoot of al-Qaeda and is listed as a terrorist organisation by several countries. However, one analyst told France 24 that some states are considering whether this designation should be maintained. The group has made recent efforts to project a more moderate image and conciliatory attitude towards minorities.
Today we've seen some suggestions that they're also saying it would be forbidden for any of their fighters to talk to women about how they should be dressing or conducting themselves. Those sorts of signs are the things that people who are in charge of these sorts of designations would be looking to.
But in the streets of Damascus, many Christians wait nervously in anticipation to see how the new government will act.
We ask them to provide us with our needs. We do not need more. The most important things are for us to feel safe and to bring order, law and respect to the citizens.
Mohammed al-Bashir has said that in the coming days, the new government will decide on each ministry. They are expected to prioritise reshaping government institutions and consolidating control over newly gained territories.
We can go to our correspondent, James Andre. He's in Damascus and has been there observing matters unfolding on a minute-by-minute basis. James, you're right where history is happening. And clearly, as we've heard from our report, some people are concerned about what happens next. Nonetheless, there is an interim prime minister and what appears to be an orderly transition.
Yes, absolutely. For now, what we are seeing is indeed a transition that does appear orderly, you're right. Indeed, this new Prime Minister, Mohammed al-Bashir, does not exactly come as a surprise because he is the head of the so-called Salvation Government in the northwestern part of Syria, which was the base, if you will, of the Hayat al-Sham movement. So, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So, what we have here is, in fact, basically the government which was set up there as a bit of a laboratory, if you will, who is indeed now installing itself in Damascus here. Now, we'll have to see what the cabinet looks like. Obviously, everybody here is very interested to see what sort of tendency will have a majority in this cabinet. And people are asking themselves the question. Of course, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is a terrorist organization, according to the United States and other countries. It is a hardline Islamist group. And of course, people are wondering if there will be a measure of democracy or tolerance for other communities, how this is going to look. Now, it's true that the group has been signaling quite clearly that it was to steer from radical Islamism and be more open and indeed include all the other communities. There have been some messages as well towards people who are part of the former regime saying, look, we need your competence, please join us, work with us. So, of course, yes, people are weary, people are wondering. But what we did today with the team is that we went to a market in central Damascus, and there were many, many people. Shops were open. Basically, this part of the city was buzzing, and we asked people what they thought of this new caretaker government. This is what they had to tell us.
Nothing is worse than what we went through. Nothing. Nothing's gonna be worse than the thing that went from before. We really want peace. We want peace. Nothing like no wars. Nothing like we just want peace. We want to live. Like we didn't live normally. Like we didn't have electricity. We didn't have like even the water. Sometimes it's not always available. So yeah, like we really we just want to live like a normal life.
It was forbidden to travel, forbidden to work. Everything was forbidden. And now, thank God. Thank God.
As a free young woman, what can I say? We used to live in fear, but that's over. We're free now, you understand? Now I just want to be safe and live our life. That's all I want.
So as you can see, there are a lot of hope on this part of the streets of Damascus. It was more of a mixed bag in the rest of the city with, for example, all the main companies, the big companies or administrations not really opening their doors. One of the women you heard there in that vox pop, the first one who spoke perfect English, well, she is a teacher. She told us her school was closed till further notice. Of course, a lot of people who've been working with the outgoing government are very weary of what might come next, not sure they want to send their children to school, not sure they want to go back to the office or leave their homes. So that is, of course, going to be a big challenge. Another thing you saw in those pictures was this young girl with a Kalashnikov assault rifle. Well, we are seeing a lot of those on the streets everywhere, some for personal protections, other held by militiamen, and it's not always clear which group these militiamen are part of.
James Andre, our reporter in Damascus, thank you for giving us that sense of the situation there in the Syrian capital as we start our debate. Let's bring in our panel to talk about the issues related to what is happening right now, and begin by heading to Jeddah, where Amar Abd Rabo is awaiting us, a freelance photojournalist. Amar, give us your sense of what is happening. A transition is on the way. An interim prime minister has been named. Give us your sense of what you feel this man may or may not do.
Well, for the moment, as we see, it's a very peaceful transition. It's a very quiet transition. Everybody was saying it would be a catastrophe. It would be a bloodbath. For the moment, we don't see any of this, fortunately. It's done in a very civilized way, let's say. So we hope it will remain like this. Of course, we are all concerned with the, let's say, the past of the people who are mainly entering into Damascus. But I think I trust them, and I've seen them in Aleppo also, the way they were experiencing. They know that Damascus and Aleppo are not that conservative. They know that there are many communities, and they know that to be accepted by them, they have to compromise. In the feature you showed in Damascus Market, I was very touched by the lady who says, "What worse can happen? Nothing can be worse than what we've seen and what we've experienced for 54 years." So this says it all, you know.
Amar, could you just? I'm going to take you back to that phrase you said that you trust them. Now, can you elaborate more on what you were saying there about trusting them? What made you think you could trust the HTS group taking over, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham?
Well, first of all, I trust facts and I trust the speech also. The facts is that they have not been into terrible revenge. They ask people not to loot, not to kill. they made sure that the economy will restart very quickly. All these things are already, I mean, some, how you say that, they are already signs, very good signs. Now it takes two to tango. We see how the Syrian people will react, will interact with these speeches.
Indeed, it takes two to tango, a very good phrase to talk about what happens next, Amma. Thank you very much indeed. I'll come back to you very shortly, if I can. Let's go to Washington. Anna Borshevskaya, fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Anna, Amma saying that it takes two to tango, and clearly there's a possibility that one or two feet will be trodden upon in the dance that happens next. The transition smooth so far, but there are different groups within Syria. And of course, this is a group taking over HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which has its roots in al-Qaeda. I mean, clearly there are points here where there could be clashes.
Yeah, absolutely. There could be clashes. We are entering into the unknown. I have to say, though, I do agree with the commentary that was made earlier. I think it's very heartfelt when one of the Syrians said what could be worse than what we've seen in 54 years. Regardless, the fall of Bashar al-Assad is something we should celebrate. This was one of the worst dictatorships in the world. And of course, there are risks along with opportunities that come. But the fact of the matter is, this is an incredible moment. We need to acknowledge it, to take a pause, and also to acknowledge that at least at present, things are looking fairly encouraging.
And that is obviously a very good sign. The strength, of course, is the resolve of the Syrian people to change and to embrace change. I mean, that the risk is possibly some kind of darkness coming from the actual origins of the movement, though it sounds as though both yourself and Amma don't think that's going to happen. In terms of the man that's been appointed as the interim prime minister, do you feel that he is the man of the situation? Do you think he's the right person at the right time?
Well, it's hard to say. And also, if I may elaborate a little bit more in my earlier comment.
Please do.
Things absolutely could get worse. There's a lot we don't know. HTS is an offshoot of al-Qaeda. So it's important to acknowledge, again, the possibility of risk. What I think is important, though, is that the West has an incredible opportunity. Whatever we may think about the current leader of HTS, that's not the point. The point is we need to be engaged in Syria. Because if we don't engage in Syria, somebody else will. It's not a question of whether you like this person or not. Nature abhors vacuum. And if we don't step in, somebody else will. And that's going to be an actor that is not interested in peace. Historically, that was Iran and Russia.
And I hear what you're saying, and we'll come back to that very, very shortly. Let's come to the studio and get our guest here to give us some kind of comment and perspective on the new interim Prime Minister. Just to remind you, here in the studio, Patricia Lalonde, who's the Vice President of Geopolitical, and Thomas Jani from Solidarity International. Patricia, I'll start with you. Mohammed al-Bashir was apparently a hardline leader in Idlib. We can't expect any different from him in Damascus when he takes over the whole country, can we? It's another hardline leader taking a hard line.
Absolutely. I am very worried about what is happening right now in Syria, because I don't think that Abu Mohammed Jolani has been cut off with Al-Qaeda. I think it's just...
You think he hasn't separated from Al-Qaeda?
No, okay. I think not. He needs money and he needs arms, so he has been obliged from the people who give the arms, and I'm thinking about the Americans, because perhaps Israel, I don't know, but I think he's changing his mind. He's changing this for this. We cannot trust them. And I would like to say three things. It's terrible because you have to remember Al-Jolani was at Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and now HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And you have to remember what happens during Daesh time and Al-Qaeda time with the Yazidi women. We have many Yazidi women in a cage. We have been burned. These pictures have been all around the world.
Oppression and attempted suppression of of the Yazidis, particularly Yazidi women?
Absolutely. It's a genocide, if I can say. And the other thing I would like to know, to tell, it's about what's happened with Samuel Paty, you know, the guy who has been beheaded. But this
the French teacher who was beheaded in Conflans Saint-Honoré near Paris, yeah?
Absolutely. And the same people has been in contact with Giuliani, the HTS people. So you cannot say, oh, good, Assad is gone, and now it's fantastic, you have this guy here. So I think it's a very dangerous game we are playing
I hear what you're saying completely, and of course...
And you know, I have been involved in Afghanistan since 10 years, and I know very well the problem. The Taliban are there, now everybody is calling the Taliban very moderate, it's okay, but you know what's happened in Afghanistan now.
Indeed,
so you cannot say, oh, it's fantastic.
The Taliban promised to be more lenient in their terms on women, respect their rights, and of course that's proven to be not the case.
Absolutely, and I was in Syria last year, myself, in Damascus and in Malula. Malula is a place where, a very well-known place where Christianism was there, and many nurses have been taken hostages by Daesh. I was there. We talked with them, and in Damascus, it was freedom. It seems. Well, I don't know. I don't go to the prison and see all the bad things. But
freedom's a relative term, isn't it? Because clearly, for some people, there wasn't freedom. Okay, but freedom in terms of how women could dress. That's what you're saying.
No, not only dress, but no. We have to be careful.
Okay, so
we have to be
caution.
Cautious. Yes,
caution is the word from Patricia Lalonde. Thank you very much indeed. Tom and Yanni, you've heard what people have been saying. Just to remind people, Mideast Director of Solidarité Internationale. Your thoughts?
I guess as a humanitarian worker, I'll try here to provide more humanitarian perspective, a bit less political. And I think before looking to the future, we should at least look a bit back of the last 11 years of Syrian war. We are talking about 500,000 dead, among which more than 300,000 civilians. We are talking about 100,000 people that disappeared. We are talking about 13 million displaced people, internally and externally to the Syria. So what's important, I think, to keep in mind is what's the state of Syria today, also from a humanitarian perspective. In 2024, the humanitarian response plan anticipates 40 million of people with humanitarian needs. Access to water, access to food, access to shelter, and tomorrow, of course, opportunities. So let's keep in mind that Syria is a very important humanitarian crisis, is a fragile context with millions of people that still need support. Will Assad fall? Change that? We don't have answers. And from a humanitarian perspective, we believe we should remain, I would say, agile and making sure we can still, together, mostly with Syrian organization, works close to the people most in need.
Because those people in need within the borders of Syria, many internally displaced, of course, as I think you've just alluded to, will be joined by those people who are coming back. Our teams at the border, for instance, near Gaziantep in Turkey, are saying people coming back. And of course, the question is, what are they coming back to? What are the conditions like? What do they expect to find? How will they cope? So many questions. Who's going to provide the answers, Thomas?
Alors, we have many geopolitical experts around the table, and the Syria crisis is extremely complex, as is the displacement pattern. Since 2 weeks and the push of HTS and the fall of Damascus, or at least of Bashar al-Assad, more than 1 million additional people has been displaced, generating additional humanitarian needs. For example, Solidarity International is active in northeast Syria. More than 60,000 people flew from northwest to northeast Syria without any direct access to basic services. We have people that were displaced and will probably intend to go back to their area of origin where they were living. What are the opportunities for them in terms of access to education, access to health, access to economic opportunity? So these are open questions, and one point which all humanitarian organizations will keep a very important look at is the access question. Can we, as humanitarian organization, being it international, national, access to the population, or will the population be able to access to the service we intend to provide to them?
Thank you very much indeed. I've spoken today to a family, a Syrian family in the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan. They fled in the early start of the 2011 disturbances, of course, the Arab Spring, as it was starting to hit Syria. Deraa was where they lived. They ended up being forced out of the country. They're kind of crossing their fingers and being very cautious about what happens next. Our next report, though, is from Lebanon, where, of course, many Syrians fled. Serge Barberi and Eliza Herbert with this.
Mohammed has not seen his homeland for over 10 years. Now the fall of the Assad regime is reawakening a fragile hope, that of going home. Unfortunately, the desire alone is not enough.
We want to go back to Syria as soon as possible. We hope that someone will give us a hand, because we don't have the means to rebuild our lives there. Our home has gone, our land too. We have nothing left, absolutely nothing.
Tahani shares his pain. 13 years ago, she fled from the bombing of her village near Homs. Since then, she's had to become accustomed to life far from her land and her roots.
No one could have imagined that one day we'd be able to return to Syria. I had totally given up hope. I'm not really happy here, and on top of that, we're being threatened with deportation. But thank God, we can finally dare to dream of returning to our country.
But this dream remains on hold for Tahani, who is now facing another winter in a tent in Bekaa because she cannot afford to go back. For others, like Juma, the wait is coming to an end. In a few days, the camp's oldest resident will return to Syria to join his sons in Homs.
It was as if we were buried, but we came back to life. God saved us. My sons are members of the Free Syrian Army. They asked me not to go back to Syria until they contacted me. They told me they would need a week at most to find me somewhere to live.
The story of these refugees from Bar Elias mirrors that of thousands of other displaced Syrians living in camps across the country. While some cannot see themselves returning to Syria for the time being, many others are hopeful that a safe and dignified return will soon become a reality.
On a human level, I think your heart goes out to all of those people in that report, because whilst on the one hand, they appear to be getting their country back, on the other hand, it is incredibly difficult for them to actually go back and resume the lives that they have lost. And Anna Borshevskaya in Washington from the Washington Institute of Near East Policy, you were talking earlier about getting involved, investment in the country. I think the implication of what you're saying is that Western allies in some way should be getting involved and making this stand on its feet. Otherwise, someone else might get in there and try to do that job for them. And fundamentally, does it come down to helping people to come back and aiding those people as they arrive? Is that what it's about?
Well, it's about a few things. First, it's about the diplomatic process in terms of leading the transition of power in Syria. And there is an international document that outlines this process. It's UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which talks about Syria's constitution, drafting of Syrian constitution, elections, so forth. So what I'm talking about first is diplomatic engagement. That's one very important piece, because remember that Russia, for its part, had assembled sorts of alternative tracks like the Astana process to sideline the Geneva process and other more mainstream Western discussions on Syria. So diplomacy shaping, helping Syria charter its own independent course is one of the most important priorities right now, because otherwise somebody else will step in. That was my first. From that, stem off other issues. Russia, for one, means its bases in Syria, and the fact that its bases means Russia retains access. So looking for ways to eject Russia out of Syria, looking for pushing Iran influence, and also on a humanitarian level, that of course would be another sub-point or part of this package. Bigger point again is that if there is a peaceful, orderly transition of power rather than a descent into chaos and violence, Syria has a future, also the Middle East has a better future, and the West has a future, because this is about ultimately more security. Syria was a hornet's nest of terrorism that affected us, and we have a direct interest in.
Anna, we're going to call you back because the sound as you're talking to us is cutting a little bit, and what you're saying is frankly too interesting to miss. So we'll try to get you back in as soon as we possibly can. But of course, we still have 3 guests with whom we can thrash out the issues. Let's go to Jeddah and Amar Abd Rabo, a freelance photojournalist who's observing this situation for us. Amar, those people who want to go back to their homes, your heart goes out to them. I know my heart goes out to them. All our hearts go out to them. How do we make it easier for them? Is it just a question of throwing money at the situation? Is it a question of really having a more orchestrated process of trying to get those people back?
Well, we have a responsibility in rebuilding, let's say, the Syrian state, in helping it. We have a responsibility in avoiding that some so-called allies of the West, like Israel, have been totally destroying in the last 48 hours the military apparatus of Syria, so creating more and more chaos. We have a responsibility in many things. So if we escape it, if we don't face it, if we let it go, like we have been doing in the last 13 years, and saying we don't want to take care of it, we don't want to be involved in it, well, you know exactly the result. You know the refugees issue, you know the terrorism issue. I'm, of course, someone who has been extremely shocked by the assassination of Samuel Paty, but I don't see what it has to do with Syria and with HTS. It's not at all the same group. Regarding Mrs. Lalonde was last year in Syria, and she appreciated the liberty and the freedom, and she mentioned Malula. But let's just remind her that Malula is just next to Sednaya, where they found yesterday a machine to crush bodies. I mean, this is something I think probably we've seen it with the Nazis, but I don't know any other place in the world, any other dictatorship where this kind of machine was found or experienced. So I let her enjoy the Syrian freedom of Bashar al-Assad and before him, his father. But honestly, the Syrians deserve much better. The Syrians don't want to see this kind of freedom, so-called, for Mrs. Lalonde, who comes for 1 week and then she leaves and she loves the wine or she loves the skirts, as someone mentioned earlier, and the freedom in Damascus. But next to that, there are millions of Syrians who've been killed, millions of Syrians who disappeared, millions of Syrians who don't want this regime, and they are extremely shocked to hear things like that. We've been hearing them, from Thierry Mariani or Marine Le Pen or other people like that. This is extremely shocking. We don't want to hear this. We want people to imagine 1 second what we have been living for 54 years, why people like me are living in France and not in Syria, etc., etc., etc. So please, I mean, if you can spare us, give us this moment, this little moment, maybe a few days where we are celebrating, where we are happy, where one of the worst dictators in the history of humanity, not just of Syria, has just disappeared, is just gone like a coward, gone to Russia. Let us enjoy this moment. Let us dance, as you've seen people dancing, people talking to medias. I mean, the media, everybody knows. All your colleagues, you can ask in France 24, you can ask everywhere.
That is something that our team has noted, Ahmad, that there's a whole different freedom in terms of how people are expressing themselves in Damascus, which is obviously a really good thing. Just to kind of try to point out what Patricia was saying earlier, I think she was trying to say that there was a certain freedom she observed there, and she was concerned that HTS taking over, we can't quite be sure what they represent. Do you agree with that? We can't quite be sure what HTS would represent?
We have concerns, we have fears, exactly. But for the moment, they just arrived. Their first decision was to say, nobody interferes in the way women are dressed, for instance. This is something I salute. This is something that is a good decision. Now, of course, if we now go in their mind and say, oh, I'm sure they don't think this way, and I'm sure they're talking something else, well, then we go into a totally different way to discuss. We cannot discuss anymore.
Indeed, we can talk about what is in someone's mind, as you say, but then the reality we're faced with is that Assad has been overthrown by this group HTS, and that is what we're dealing with right now, and we see how that develops. Ammar, for now,
and
thank you.
And it's not just by HTS. We have to remember that it's HTS with a major coalition in which there are many Syrian forces. So this is also important because they all, I mean, the Free Army or other movements. So it's not just HTS. HTS is the leader, but it's not the main or the only one.
Thank you, Ammar, for that precision, which is extremely important to point out. Thank you, Ammar Abd Rabou. We'll come back to you very shortly. Patricia Lalonde, I'll give you a chance to maybe answer some of the things that Ammar was saying. Go ahead.
I don't understand, because for me, Al-Qaeda, Daesh is the worst thing we can have, the worst thing. So I don't understand what he's telling this guy. He's telling...
HTS saying that they've moved on from that. They've actually sort of distanced themselves from Al-Qaeda. That's what they're saying.
Yes, but I don't believe it at all.
Okay.
And it's not only me. It's people like Fabrice Balanche who wrote a book about it, and I know him, and he explained it's not true. He has not cut off. It's a sort of arrangement, and we are giving Syria to Al-Qaeda and Daesh again. It's unbelievable. And you know what's happened with the Arab Springs period? The Muslim Brotherhood, they want Muslim Brotherhood to be everywhere, but Egypt don't want them. Jordania don't want
Mohammed
them.
al-Morsi elected, but then jailed.
Yes. So now we have the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, and Assad have fought against the Muslim Brotherhood all his life, and that's the situation. So now it's Mr. I don't know his name. He's prefers to have a Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda. It's
I think what Ammar's saying is that it's an alternative to Assad, and he's pointed out the horrors of the Assad regime, and I think he's been very clear on that one. Yeah. Can I just park this part of the debate and get back to what happens to the people who want to return, the refugees, 3.2 million in Turkey alone? Can I bring you in next, Thomas Jani from Solidarité Internationale? Getting those people back, helping those people to set up their lives again in a country that is in chaos, is broke, has no money. There's a risk, clearly, of shortages of all kinds when they come back. It is a risky thing to bring all those people back in one fell swoop. I mean, how do you cope with that? How do you begin to sort of say to those people, you've got to wait, you must take your time, you can't rush back straight away? And if they come back, who's there to help them?
I think it's key to understand that within the humanitarian principle and law, and it was mentioned in one of your reportages, we expect return to be safe, secured, dignified, and voluntary. And this is a very important point. People need to make the decision by themselves. And we can expect and anticipate that if they wish to return, it's because their life is not threatened, and they will have an opportunity to rebuild their life in the country, in their area of origin. So as a humanitarian worker, I'm not here to say if they should return or not return, but I will set, I guess, 2 or 3 priorities. First, demonstrating that there is a capacity to answer immediate emergency for people that are on the move. I mean, people will not move if they are exposed to a very high risk, being able to provide emergency assistance to them. Accompanying a return is a part where humanitarian can have a role to play, but looking at the long term, of course, rebuilding, reconstruction, making sure people have access to the basic services, the one that all of us expect, from their state or from social organization or in this type of context from humanitarian organization. access to education to build a future, access to food to survive, access to water, of course, access to health. What has not been said is that besides the ongoing political discussion about HTS, not HTS, I mean, it's a country that has been bombed since 11 years by all parties. There were and there is still frontline everywhere between HTS and the government.
And in the past 24 hours, of course, Israel carrying out its airstrikes on Latakia
and basic
the Navy, Syria's Navy.
So there will be a need for also long-term reconstruction because, I mean, civil infrastructure, school, hospital, water treatment unit are in the vast majority of the country destroyed. Last but not the least, two very important factors to take into consideration. The deep economic crisis the country is into, since ever because it's in war, but since the last 2 or 3 years, it's a collapse of the economics from the government health side, under Bashar, but also on other part. And I would say a climate-related crisis. Water is scarce in Syria. It creates tension, and it's fundamental for the people, but also for agriculture, for economic recovery. So this is a complex world where, of course, the next 2-3 weeks and 2-3 months, and how HTS will evolve in this position will be key, but where there will be also a need of, I would say, a worldwide contribution.
Against this, though, you have European countries now saying they're stopping processing asylum seekers from Syria, so that's the door closing there. Donald Trump, of course, saying on social media almost immediately, the US will not get involved. Now, perhaps he means militarily in some way, shape or form, but perhaps he means completely, we don't want to know, no problem at all. It doesn't concern us. What do you think about that attitude?
I guess humanitarian workers, as I am, are working under key principle. Impartiality, humanity, of course, independence, but also neutrality. And I'm not here to comment political decisions from the US next president.
I'd love to know what you think, though, Tama.
Somehow I'll say it. Return should be safe, voluntarily and secured. And secondly, I mean, France is offering asylum as a policy of asylum. If there is still some people fitting within this asylum, they should be considered. If not, state will make a decision.
Thomas Jandy, thank you very much indeed. Anna Boshevskaya is back. I hope the sound is clearer. Anna, I hope you can hear us. We can see you. Let's bring you in again and try to see whether we can get your sense of the situation. Donald Trump saying he doesn't want to get involved. I presume he was meaning, and you should never presume, of course, but I think he's meaning militarily in some way, shape or form. Because as you were saying, someone has to fill the gap there. And if it's not someone who's going to do it for good, it may be someone who's going to do it for bad.
Well, I think what Donald Trump was talking about was, first, the United States has about approximately 900 troops stationed in Syria, and they have a very specific anti-ISIS mission. So one of the questions is he going to pull those troops out? That is one question going forward that we need to think about. Another is, to what extent is the United States going to be involved diplomatically? What I was saying earlier before I was cut off, in response to your earlier question, is that there is an internationally agreed upon document that outlines the price of a blue map for Syrians helping shape their own future. And that is UN Security Council Resolution 2254. It was unanimously adopted by the UN Security Council in 2015, I believe. And so the question is, the United States going to be involved diplomatically? First, there's a military component, a limited but a military component. And second, there's a diplomatic component. If I were to take together, the question again comes back to my earlier point, and that is, will US, and here specifically the United States, play a role in helping Syria forge a better future? Because without that involvement, all of these concerns that were expressed earlier about Al-Qaeda, by terrorist organizations, that is precisely when these actors have a better chance of taking in that vacuum. And if we want to see a more stable, secure, peaceful future, it will be with the help of the West help Syria forge its own path. It will not be with the help of Russia and Iran. Also, if I may just add on a quick comment responding to some of the earlier comments other panelists have made, certainly, again, I want to reiterate, there's a lot we don't know. There is a lot of uncertainty. But Bashar al-Assad, along with Russia, arguably encouraged terrorism, organizations like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, even if it was indirect. So if we think about, if we have this discussion about what's worse ISIS for Assad, I think that's not the right way to frame this discussion. The right way to frame this discussion is go forward without Assad and help Syria forge a better, more secure future will in turn will be us.
Assad currently in Moscow. This can be seen as a massive defeat for Russia, for Vladimir Putin, do you think?
It is absolutely a massive strategic defeat for Vladimir Putin, and I think that's also something we need to acknowledge and celebrate. Remember, both Putin and Assad are wanted for international crimes. However, I will caution that that Russia is not fully out of Syria. Russia retains military bases in Syria, and Russia is still involved in the diplomatic track, which again is why it's so important for the West to step up. Then Russia has a way of coming back in unless it is contested.
Anna Boshevskaya, thank you very much indeed. We're getting towards final comment time, and I think possibly we've got time for one final comment. I'll get that from Amar Abdrabbo, freelance photojournalist, Syrian citizen, currently joining us from Jeddah. You live in France, Amar, you say, and obviously I'm wondering sort of how you view the coming times. Amar, do you think you'll be going back? Do you think you'll be sort of setting foot in Syria soon?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going back in 3 days. I mean, very soon, the sooner. It's very, again, it's a historical moment. It's a very moving moment. The problem has gone. You know, the problem has gone. Again, as Anna was saying, the involvement of the Syrian regime in a lot of terrorism for 5 decades. You talk about Carlos, you talk about Palestinian organizations, you talk about Islamist organizations that have been created, manipulated, financed by Syria, used as tool to destabilize or to be into bargains with the West or with this or that country. And I agree again with Anna that it's now the moment where this country has been taken, let's say, from Russia and from Iran. We definitely need to help them. If we leave them alone, I don't know, they might go to, as you said, to Afghanistan or to something worse than Bashar. I don't know if something worse than Bashar exists, but we have really to be there for the Syrian needs.
Amar Abdrabbo, freelance photojournalist, Syrian citizen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks to our other guests, to Anna Boshevskaya, joining us from Washington. Thanks to here in the studio, Patricia Lalonde, and to Thomas Jani. Thanks to you all for watching wherever you're around the world. Do stay with us here in France 24. More to come.